There's a good chance of a significant drop in the price of fuel. That's next week really, but the exact amount is yet to be announced. This follows successive months of massive price increases. The Transport Minister has also announced during this week plans to deregulate, well, not the Transport Minister per se, but government has announced plans to deregulate the fuel space, let's call it that. And what's going to be affected, and by the way, and I'm explaining this now because it's not going to be across the board, is 93-octane petrol. That's what's going to be covered as far as deregulation is concerned. Let's bring in our business reporter, Kopano Gumbi, who's with me now on set, Kopano. And let's start with that point, right? Deregulation has been a big deal, but not everyone is going to benefit. Absolutely.
And I wonder who exactly will, well, I guess consumers are the ones who are going to benefit the most from that. Because essentially what deregulation, at least of this 93, would allow us to do, or is to have retailers set their prices for consumers. And so they can compete on lowering prices, but they cannot compete beyond a certain cap. So the price would be maximum, let's say, for example, 25 Rand. You wouldn't be able to charge more than 25 Rand a litre across the board, but you can always charge less. Now, this is not the best news for the Fuel Retailers Association, who tell us that really this compromises their current operating model, that they are not in a position where they can compete on price because the margins for buying fuel are so thin and the amount of money they make from selling it to us is so thin that it would really actually make them quite uncompetitive.
And just how are fuel retailers working at the moment when you consider the many pressures? Because I remember they convened a few weeks ago where they looked at how the sector has been impacted by all of this, and again there was pressure on government to do more to ease the pressure.
Absolutely, and that's a very interesting point that they raised with us, in fact, that they are equally as affected by the increase in prices as consumers are, because they are net importers of petrol. We do not own any oil on South African soil, and so we do not produce it of our own. In fact, we only produce about 30% of the crude oil that we need as a society to function. And so the rest of that comes from external players across the world. Globally, we import most of that crude oil, which we then use for petrol, diesel, etc. All of that needs to be imported. And so they are price takers as much as we are price takers in that regard. And we know, speaking to many petrol station owners, they often tell us that there's no real money in selling of the petrol day to day, but where they really make their money is in the stores that are at the garages, selling cigarettes, selling food and snacks, etc., because there isn't that much money. And so the Retail Association is saying just that, to say we already don't have the money to offer significant discounts. This short-term solution is not going to be very, very sustainable in the long term. And unfortunately, when you have policy, it means it's set in stone for the foreseeable future, but it doesn't really solve the problem.
You mentioned two things I'd like to pick up on: short-term and crude oil. Government is pleased this week because there's been a rather significant drop in the cost of Brent crude per barrel, right? But in terms of a cushion and actual help for South Africans who don't want to pay more for fuel, let's be honest, how much longer do we expect that to last?
We don't expect it to last much longer. In fact, that cushion, the levy that they had discounted for us, is going to come to an end next month. They cannot afford it. They simply cannot afford to lose that amount of money in revenue. It's 6 billion Rand a month that they lose as a result of having discounted petrol for us. And government cannot afford it. We have way too many expenses on our book and not enough revenue to generate that would make up for that. And so that's definitely going to be cut, more likely August. But, you know, perhaps they could consider extending it into September and October. But again, we are unfortunately subject to whatever happens in the international markets. So if the Brent crude price increases again, we will have to increase prices. And if the Brent crude continues to fall like it's been falling over the last 2 months, we'll see what we're going to see next month, which is a drop in the fuel price.
And we've been speaking, haven't we, about the deregulation as per the price of 93 octane. They've got to this moment of celebration, a bit of a breather from a drop in crude oil prices, but there is still in South Africa pending an actual recalculation conversation on the fuel price.
It absolutely is. And I mean, we're not sure how far those conversations are. We know that, at least on this deregulation matter, it's only now being put forward for public comment, and it's a long way away from being finalized. And so any other conversation that we have around how we calculate fuel, how that happens, that process will take time. And in the meantime, we have to pay more.
And while we wait, by the way, what we're told, and I was speaking to Leighton Beard from the Automobile Association earlier, we're told that we could see a drop of what, 1 rand 120 for a litre petrol?
The estimate is around 1 rand 90, but because this is the last month that we have a little bit of that fuel, or we don't have the fuel discount, the net effect is going to be around between 120 and 150 decrease per litre. So at least underneath 25 rand a litre, which should give some reprieve for the meantime.
But we're still not out of excuses yet to avoid visiting relatives we don't want to see, right?
No, we are not.
Kopano Gumbi, a business reporter, making sense of the fuel price. See me adjusting my glasses there.